ever get that feeling, even when things seem reasonably okay financially, that there's still this untapped
Oh,
potential.
absolutely.
Like you're making progress, sure, but you're wondering, how do I really accelerate things? How do I build wealth in a way that feels solid and sustainable? That kind of hunger for more.
It's a really common drive, isn't it? We live in a world where financial security, financial growth, it's often top of mind.
Yeah.
And that desire, that wanting to build a more robust financial future, that's a powerful motivator for so many people.
Well, welcome everyone to Book Talk Finance. I'm really thrilled to kick off this discussion. This is where we dive into the world of personal finance, wealth building, all through the lens of really insightful books.
And today we're getting into a fantastic one. It's called Just Keep Buying, Proven Ways to Save Money and Build Your Wealth by Nick Maggiulli.
Nick Maggiulli, he's such an interesting voice in this whole financial space, don't you think?
He really is. What I find sets him apart is his commitment to using data, actual evidence, to test and sometimes, frankly, challenge those long-held beliefs about how we should manage our money.
Exactly.
His goal seems to be cutting through all the noise and just giving actionable, data-backed strategies, things you can actually use.
Right. So think of this book talk as your kind of express lane to understanding the core ideas in Nick's book. We're going to try and pull out the most important concepts, those moments that make you go, aha, the things that can really shift how you think about building wealth.
Yeah, and hopefully deliver them in a way that's clear, engaging, and doesn't feel like you're drowning in complex jargon.
Definitely.
So our goal today is really to unpack this central philosophy of just keep buying. We'll explore some of the key questions Maggiulli tackles using his data-driven approach. We'll be looking at everything from the basics like saving and investing to understanding debt, and even some surprising stuff about how we perceive wealth.
Okay, let's jump right in then. The title itself, Just Keep Buying. It sounds almost deceptively simple. What's the real core idea behind that?
Well, the beauty of it is kind of in that simplicity. The main idea, the central tenet, is that consistently, regularly investing over time, like regardless of what the market's doing, the ups and downs, that's an incredibly powerful strategy for long-term wealth building. He shares this great little story and anecdote about his grandfather, suggesting that even with some, let's say, less than perfect financial habits, just that consistent investment could have led to significant wealth.
So the just keep buying idea is almost like a way to bypass our own bad habits or emotional reactions.
Exactly. It helps us sidestep those often flawed emotional responses to market volatility, panic selling or getting too greedy, and just build wealth steadily, methodically.
He even uses the example of, what was it, 2000 to 2009? That was a pretty rough decade for the stock market.
A very turbulent time, yeah. And the fact that this strategy still holds up, even through a period like that, it really says something about its resilience.
It does.
And Maggiulli stresses this. The book is really designed to answer a lot of those common questions we all have about personal finance and investing. But instead of just relying on gut feelings or, what everyone else says,
Conventional wisdom.
right, conventional wisdom, he anchors his answers in solid data. And honestly, this often leads to insights that might actually surprise you. They might challenge some of the advice you hear repeated all the time.
Okay, so it's about data consistency.
Yeah, and it works partly because you're implicitly dollar cost averaging,
Yeah.
right? Buying more shares when prices are low, fewer when they're high. It smooths out your average cost,
And takes the emotion out of trying to time the market.
which is, as we know, incredibly difficult, almost impossible to do consistently.
Yeah.
So just keep buying removes that burden.
Okay. Now, early in the book, he talks about something called the save-invest continuum. Can you break that down for us? What's the difference he's highlighting between saving and investing?
Right, so Maggiulli introduces this with a statement that sounds maybe a little provocative. He says, saving is for the poor and investing is for the rich.
Okay, that definitely gets your attention.
It does, but it's really important to understand how he's using poor and rich here. It's not just about absolute wealth, like someone with very little versus someone with millions.
Right.
He's also using it in a relative sense. So think about a recent graduate just starting out. They might not be poor in the absolute sense, but compared to their future, more financially established self, their current situation is less wealthy, relatively speaking.
Okay, I see. That distinction is key. So for someone just starting their financial journey, the main focus might need to be more on, say, increasing their income and just building up some capital through saving first, before worrying too much about complex investment strategies.
Precisely. That's Maggiulli's point. If you don't have a significant amount of capital to invest yet, your primary focus really should be on boosting your income, because that's what increases your capacity to save in the first place.
Makes sense.
He even includes data showing these huge differences in savings rates across income levels. The bottom 20% save a much, much smaller fraction of their income compared to the top 20% or the top 5% or the top 1%.
Wow.
So it really underlines how your immediate financial priorities probably should shift depending on where you are on that sort of financial spectrum.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so how do we actually figure out how much we can save? That feels like the first big practical hurdle for a lot of folks.
Maggiulli boils it down to a pretty basic equation. Savings equals income minus spending. Simple enough on paper, right?
Yeah, looks simple.
But he totally acknowledges that for most of us, tracking every single penny we spend, it just feels overwhelming. It's a huge task.
Oh, tell me about it. I've tried those super detailed budgeting apps, and honestly, they often end up causing more stress than actually helping me understand where the money's going.
He gets that completely. So instead of pushing for that kind of meticulous, granular tracking, he suggests some more practical, less intimidating ways to estimate your spending.
Like what?
Well, one really useful idea he puts forward is to try channeling your variable expenses, the non-essential stuff, onto a single credit card.
Oh, cool.
One that you absolutely commit to paying off in full every month. That way, you get a much clearer picture of where your discretionary money is going without needing to log every coffee or magazine purchase.
That actually sounds doable, much more manageable than tracking everything. He also mentions this interesting psychological thing, doesn't he? This feeling that we should always be saving more, even if we're doing okay.
Exactly. He points out this fascinating gap. You ask the average person how much money you need to be considered wealthy, and then you ask actual millionaires how much they feel is needed to feel truly wealthy.
And the numbers are different.
Often quite different, yeah. Millionaires frequently report needing significantly more to feel wealthy. It just highlights this human tendency, this sort of persistent feeling that we could or maybe should be doing more, saving more, even when our financial reality might be pretty decent.
Which then leads him to this really surprising, kind of counterintuitive idea he puts forward. The suggestion that maybe, just maybe, you might actually need to save less aggressively than you think. That definitely made me pause.
Yeah, this is where his focus on data really offers a fresh perspective. He cites some pretty compelling research showing that a significant number of retirees don't actually spend down all their savings in retirement.
Really? They don't deplete their accounts?
In many cases, no. Their assets often stay stable or sometimes even continue to grow throughout retirement.
Wow.
So this suggests that for quite a few people, that common fear, the risk of completely running out of money in retirement, it might actually be lower than we generally assume.
So the implication is, maybe we don't need to be quite so hyper-focused on maximizing savings during our working years, especially if it means sacrificing too much enjoyment now.
That's essentially his argument.
Yeah.
Now, he's definitely not saying be irresponsible with spending. Not at all.
Sure.
But he suggests that for many people, a more balanced approach, one that allows for current enjoyment and other life priorities, might be perfectly fine, especially when you factor in potential income growth over your career and the long-term power of even consistent, moderate saving and investing.
Okay. Now, Maggiulli really takes aim at something he calls the biggest lie in personal finance, which is this idea that just cutting back on small, everyday expenses, the classic latte factor, is the main way most people get rich. I think we've all heard that one.
Oh, yeah. This is a point where he strongly pushes back against a very common narrative, especially in mainstream financial media.
Right.
He argues pretty forcefully that for the vast majority of people, the real drivers of getting wealthy are usually either a high income or spending that's significantly lower than your income, which often means pretty extreme lifestyle choices, or ideally, both.
So skipping the daily coffee isn't going to cut it for most of us.
Basically, yeah.
Yeah.
He emphasizes that while being mindful of spending is, of course, important, obsessing over every small purchase isn't going to make a meaningful difference in your overall wealth if your income just isn't high enough to begin with.
He brings in some fascinating research from Bangladesh, too, about wealth transfer programs. Seems like an odd example, but it makes a powerful point.
It really does. He talks about studies where giving productive assets, like livestock, to women living in deep poverty had this profound positive impact. It helped them actually lift themselves out of that extreme poverty cycle. The key takeaway there is that for people starting with very, very little, just Cutting small expenses isn't enough. It doesn't break that cycle of low-paying jobs and just not having enough resources.
So increasing income is often a much more critical factor than just trimming expenses, especially when you're starting from a place of real financial difficulty.
Precisely. It really puts those sometimes, let's be honest, condescending articles,
Yeah.
the ones blaming people's financial problems on buying avocado toast or whatever, it puts them in a very different light. Yeah, it does. He's quite critical of that viewpoint, and rightly so, I think. It often completely ignores the bigger picture, the systemic issues, the reality of income inequality. For many, the math of skipping a latte just doesn't add up to real wealth.
Okay, so if cutting small expenses isn't the magic bullet for most people, what strategies does McGilly suggest for actually increasing your income?
He outlines a few main paths. First, there's simply selling time, basically having a traditional job. It's often the easiest way to start earning, right? But it's limited by hours in the day, doesn't really scale beyond your own effort.
Got it. What else?
Then there's selling a skill or a service. Think freelancing, consulting. This can definitely pay more, let you build a brand maybe, but it still usually requires your direct time and doesn't automatically scale up easily.
He also mentioned teaching, right? Especially online.
Yes, teaching is interesting because it can be more scalable, particularly with online courses, workshops, live classes. You can leverage your knowledge to reach way more people than just one-on-one. That scales income potential much better than just trading hours for dollars.
And the traditional path.
And finally, yeah, he touches on the traditional 9-to-5 route, especially jobs needing professional degrees or specialized skills. He notes that this is still a very common, often successful path to building wealth, like the studies in The Millionaire Next Door showed.
But he frames all these income-boosting methods as sort of means to an end, doesn't he?
Absolutely. He really stresses that the ultimate goal should be to use that extra income strategically. Use it to acquire assets, things that generate income on their own, passively.
Ah, okay.
That shift from just earning income through labor to owning income-producing assets, that's the real key he identifies for building significant, lasting wealth.
And that leads perfectly into his idea of thinking like an owner. Can you explain what he means by that? How's it different from just, selling your time or skills?
He uses a great example, Jerry Richardson, former NFL player, right? But his real wealth didn't come from playing football.
Yeah.
It came later, from owning a bunch of successful Hardee's franchises and then eventually owning the Carolina Panthers NFL team. He owned businesses.
So it's about ownership, not just labor.
Exactly. Maggiulli encourages us to consciously shift our mindset, move away from only thinking about earning income through our direct work and towards actively looking for opportunities to build or buy assets that will generate income for us. It's that fundamental shift. Stop being just an employee. Start becoming an owner in some way.
Okay, let's switch gears a bit to spending itself. He introduces this cool rule, the 2X rule, to help manage spending guilt. That sounds pretty practical.
Yeah, the 2X rule is really simple, but surprisingly effective as a behavioral nudge. The basic idea is whenever you feel like making a non-essential purchase, a splurge, you also commit to investing the exact same amount of money.
So if I want that $100 gadget,
You also have to put $100 into your investment account right then and there. It acts as this natural check. It forces you to really think, how much do I really value this thing? Because now it has this added cost, the cost of delaying your long-term financial goals by that same amount.
it creates like an immediate link between that discretionary spending and building wealth. That makes a lot of sense intuitively. He also talks about focusing on fulfillment over just happiness when spending. What's the difference there?
He draws this distinction between, short-term, maybe superficial happiness and a deeper, more lasting sense of satisfaction and accomplishment, which he calls fulfillment.
Can you give an example?
Sure, like
Sure.
running a marathon. The actual running might not feel purely happy in the moment, right? It's hard work.
Definitely not.
But that feeling when you cross the finish line, that deep sense of fulfillment of achieving something difficult, that's often profound and sticks with you.
Ah, okay.
So he encourages us to ask ourselves before buying something, will this genuinely contribute to my long-term fulfillment? If it aligns with your values, your bigger goals, then maybe you can make that purchase without feeling guilty.
So it's about aligning spending with what really matters long term, not just chasing quick fixes. That feels like a much healthier way to approach money.
Totally. He even mentions research showing that purchases aligned with your psychological profile actually lead to higher life satisfaction, even more so than just having a higher income overall.
Wow, really?
Yeah. It reinforces this idea that thoughtful, intentional spending based on what truly brings you lasting satisfaction is key to making guilt-free and ultimately more rewarding financial choices.
Okay, let's tackle debt. It gets such a bad rap, often painted as just plain bad. But Maggiulli sees more nuance, right?
He definitely does. He argues that debt is basically a financial tool. And like any tool, a hammer can build a house or smash your thumb. It depends entirely on how you use it.
Okay, so when can debt be used effectively?
Well, he gives a few examples. Sometimes it can actually be a behavioral tool for saving. He mentions this surprising finding that some people save more consistently when they have a loan payment they're focused on.
Huh, interesting.
It can also decrease uncertainty. Think about a fixed-rate mortgage. You lock in your housing payment for years, which provides stability.
Right.
And, of course, the classic one, using debt to invest in something that could generate a return higher than the cost of borrowing, like education, starting a business, or even sometimes a mortgage if property values rise sufficiently.
He even gives that simple formula for figuring out the value of a degree.
Yeah, it's a rough guide, but useful. Estimate the extra lifetime earnings from the degree, cut that roughly in half for present value, and then subtract the total cost, including any lost income while you were studying. Helps you think critically about the ROI.
But he does also mention the downsides, the non-financial costs.
Oh, absolutely. That's crucial. While debt can be used strategically, the stress, the anxiety, the mental and emotional toll that high debt can take, that should never be ignored. It's a really personal decision, weighing the potential financial pros against the very real potential cons for your specific situation.
Makes sense. What about the big one? Buying a home. It's such a huge decision. What's his take?
He acknowledges it's massive. Yeah. Lots of costs involved, not just the down payment, but closing costs, insurance, maintenance, property taxes.
Mm-hmm.
It adds up.
For sure.
He also brings up opportunity cost. He compares historical housing returns to, say, S&P 500 returns, suggesting that purely as an investment for building wealth, a house might not always be the absolute best place for your money compared to the stock market over the long run.
But people still want to own homes for other reasons.
Exactly. There are huge societal factors, right? Ownership rates are much higher among wealthier households. It's often seen as a milestone, a sign of stability.
So when is it potentially the right time, financially speaking?
He suggests a couple of key things to consider. Can you comfortably put down 20%? This avoids private mortgage insurance, PMI, and gives you immediate equity. And is your overall debt-to-income ratio manageable even with the mortgage payment?
Okay, 20% down and manageable DTI.
He also makes an interesting point about maybe waiting to buy a bigger or longer-term home rather than starting with a small starter home.
Why is that?
Because the transaction costs of buying and selling agent commissions, closing costs, again, they really eat into your equity, especially if you move after just a few years. Waiting might save you those costs.
That's a good point. Transaction costs are often overlooked.
And he does mention one historical benefit: inflation. Over decades, inflation tends to erode the real value of your fixed mortgage payments, which can be helpful.
Right. Your payment stays the same, but its purchasing power decreases. Okay, so saving for that down payment or any big purchase, really, how should we approach that? Does it matter how soon we need the money?
Yeah, the time horizon is absolutely key here. His advice is pretty straightforward.
Okay.
For goals that are pretty close, say, less than 3 years away, cash is generally the safest bet. You don't want market fluctuations messing with your down payment fund right before you need it.
Even though inflation might eat away at it a bit.
Right, that's the trade-off. You accept a little loss to inflation in exchange for certainty and safety over that short term.
And for goals further out, more than 3 years.
For longer-term goals, he suggests bonds might be a better option. They offer some potential return, hopefully enough to offset inflation, or maybe even beat it slightly, but they're generally less volatile than stocks. So a bit more growth potential than cash, less risk than stocks.
Okay, cash for short-term, bonds for medium-term goals.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Let's talk retirement. He touches on the non-financial side, too, not just the numbers.
He does. He mentions the standard stuff, like the 4% rule needing about 25 times your annual spending saved up, and the crossover point rule being retired when your monthly investment income covers your expenses.
Right, the typical financial independence metrics.
But then he also discusses the FIRE movement, financial independence, retire early. And he brings up some potential downsides, things like, well, loneliness, or losing your sense of purpose if you retire really early without a plan for your time.
So retirement isn't just about hitting a number.
Not at all. He emphasizes it's a huge lifestyle shift. You need to think seriously about how you'll spend your days, maintain social connections, find meaning and purpose outside of work. It's as much a life decision as a financial one.
That's a really important perspective. Okay, so why invest at all? What are the fundamental reasons he gives?
He boils it down to three main reasons. First, pretty obviously, is saving for your future self, preparing for retirement. He notes that people who frame saving as saving for retirement tend to save more consistently.
Interesting psychological quirk.
Second is preserving your money against inflation. He shows how inflation just erodes your purchasing power over time if your money's just sitting there. Stocks and even bonds have historically outpaced inflation over the long run, protecting your wealth.
And the third reason?
The third is about replacing your human capital with financial capital.
Okay, explain human capital.
Your human capital is essentially the value of your skills, your knowledge, your time, your ability to earn an income through work. But that's finite, right? You can only work so many hours for so many years.
Yeah.
Investing allows you to convert that finite human capital, earned through work, into financial capital assets that can keep working and growing for you even when you're not actively laboring. It makes your wealth potentially last much longer.
Converting work into lasting assets. Got it.
Yeah.
And he stresses starting early, right? The power of time.
Hugely. He uses this analogy about racehorses, how the size of their heart is a key factor determined early on. In finance, that key early factor is time.
Because of compounding?
Compounding, yes, but also just because equity markets tend to trend upwards over the very long term. Starting earlier means you're more likely buying in at lower average prices than you might encounter years down the road.
So that saying, the best time to start was yesterday, the next best time is today.
That sums it up perfectly. He also touches on how to invest when you get a lump sum, like an inheritance or bonus.
Right, invest it all at once, buy now, or spread it out, average and dollar cost averaging.
His data analysis suggests that, historically, buy now, investing the lump sum as soon as you get it too, tends to outperform averaging in over the long term, about 2/3 of the time.
Even though averaging in feels less risky.
Exactly. Averaging in reduces the regret risk if the market drops right after you invest, but statistically, you're more likely to miss out on gains by holding cash on the sidelines.
What if someone is really worried about the risk of putting it all in stocks at once?
He suggests a compromise. Maybe buy now, but into a more balanced portfolio, like 60% stocks and 40% bonds instead of 100% stocks. You still get the money working sooner, but with less volatility.
Makes sense. It links back to the difficulty of market timing again.
Precisely. Trying to time the perfect entry point is usually a losing game. Consistent investment, just keep buying, is generally more reliable.
He also mentioned something called sequence of return risk, how your birth year can impact things.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Basically, if you happen to retire right before a major market downturn, withdrawing money early in retirement from a depleted portfolio can seriously damage its long-term sustainability. Your birth year dictates the market cycle you hit at that crucial early retirement phase. It's kind of luck of the draw.
Wow, that's a bit scary. So what about market downturns, volatility? How should we think about those?
His message here is basically embrace it, or at least accept it as part of the process. He uses the story of Fred Smith starting FedEx, taking a huge risk, because the risk of inaction was even greater.
So don't panic sell.
Definitely don't panic sell. He shows data illustrating that trying to dodge all the market dips, trying to time your way around volatility, historically leads to much, much lower returns compared to just buying and holding through the storm.
And downturns can actually be opportunities.
Yes. He argues that significant market downturns often present the best long-term buying opportunities. Why? Because a percentage loss requires an even larger percentage gain just to get back to even.
Right. If you lose 50%, you need a 100% gain to recover.
Exactly. So buying when prices are down significantly boosts your potential future returns. He even provides a formula to estimate expected returns after a drop and shares data showing that buying after major declines, like 30% drops, has historically led to really strong returns during the recovery.
Okay, so just keep buying, especially when things look bleak. But when should we consider selling? Surely we sell sometime.
Of course. But his key point is that selling decisions should ideally be based on a predefined plan, not driven by fear or greed in the moment.
So what are the valid reasons to sell, according to him?
He outlines three main ones. First, to rebalance your portfolio. If stocks have done really well and now make up too large a percentage of your assets compared to your target, you sell some stocks and buy bonds to get back in line.
Does rebalancing help returns?
It primarily reduces risk.
Hmm.
Interestingly, he notes it can actually slightly lower your total long-term returns compared to never rebalancing because you're trimming your winners,
Ah,
but it keeps your risk level consistent with your plan.
okay. Risk management. What else?
Second reason, to get out of a position that's become too concentrated or is clearly a loser, again for risk management, don't let one bad investment sink your whole portfolio.
Makes sense. And the third?
The third is simply to meet your financial needs. You sell investments to fund retirement withdrawals, pay for that house down payment we talked about, or handle other large planned expenses.
So plan your selling. Don't react emotionally. He has this phrase, buy quickly, sell slowly.
Yeah, it contrasts with the lump sum advice. For selling, especially in retirement, taking your time, maybe selling smaller amounts gradually, can be a more prudent approach than trying to time a big exit.
Got it. Any quick thoughts on retirement accounts like 401k?
He touches briefly on the traditional versus Roth 401k decision.
Yeah.
He notes that traditional accounts offer more flexibility regarding taxes in retirement, since you don't know your future tax rate for sure.
And the tax benefit. Is it huge?
He actually points out that the annual tax benefit of contributing to a 401k, compared to just investing in a regular taxable brokerage account, might be smaller than many people perceive, though the long-term tax-deferred or tax-free growth is still very valuable.
Interesting nuance. Okay, nearing the end here. He talks about the idea of feeling rich. It's not just about the number, is it?
Not at all. He tells the story of Jack Whitaker, the lottery winner, who was already quite wealthy before winning, but still didn't feel rich. More money doesn't always equal feeling wealthy.
Why is that?
He explains that being rich is often really relative. It depends heavily on who you compare yourself to, your social circle, your environment.
Right.
He even shows data on how vastly different the net worth required to be in the top 1% is, depending on your age and education level. It's not one single number.
So feeling rich is subjective. What does he say is the most important asset then, if not just money?
Time. Unquestionably time. He believes it's our most valuable and totally irreplaceable asset.
How does he illustrate that?
He shares this incredible, inspiring story of Dashrath Manji, the mountain man in India, who spent 22 years carving a path through a mountain with just hand tools, all to shorten the travel distance for his village after his wife died needing medical care.
Wow, 22 years? That's unbelievable perseverance.
It really is. And it demonstrates the immense power of time combined with consistent effort. He relates this back to our financial lives, emphasizing the long-term impact of how we use our time, especially early in our careers.
He mentions his own experience.
Yeah, he shares personally about not hitting an early financial goal he'd set and realizing later that focusing more on his career and income growth earlier would likely have been more impactful than optimizing investments at that stage.
Because you can always earn more money, but you can't get back lost time.
Exactly. Money can be lost and earned back. Time, once spent, is gone forever. He also briefly touches on the happiness hue curve, how our satisfaction levels tend to dip in midlife, partly because our expectations might outpace our reality before rising again later.
Managing expectations over time. Okay. This has been incredibly insightful, really digging into Nick Maggiulli's Just Keep Buying. We've covered a ton of ground.
We really have. From that core idea of consistent investing to saving, debt, spending, retirement, and the huge value of time.
Hopefully this discussion has given all of you listening some valuable ideas to think about, maybe some things to consider applying to your own financial journey. The core message really seems to be about consistency, data over emotion, and playing the long game.
Absolutely. And remember, everything we talked about comes from Nick Maggiulli's research and analysis in the book, Just Keep Buying. We definitely encourage you to check out the book itself to explore these ideas in even more detail and see how they fit your specific situation.
And that wraps up this book talk, Finance. Thank you so much for joining us as we unpack the principles of Just Keep Buying. If you found this useful and you want more discussions like this, diving into insightful books on finance and wealth building,
Then definitely subscribe to the channel.
yeah, subscribe. We'll be back soon with another engaging book talk to help you on your financial journey. Thanks for listening.